You know Black Lives Matter? Yeah, she has Black Lives Matter shirt on out here in Pattaya, Thailand. Just want to show y'all the shirt over here, y'all. Yep. Okay. All right, nice meeting you, okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the former IBF Junior Middleweight World Champion and the current hard-hitting, undefeated, reigning and defending WBC Middleweight Champion of the World, introducing Jamal Hitman Charlo, former Super Middleweight Champion of the World, introducing El Bandera Roja,
he's fighting guys I don't want to see anymore. And again, I'm not knocking Plant. I'm glad he got $10 million. Not knocking Billy Joe. He fought a real good fight up to that point, the best he could fight. And he did get a broken orbital bone. I get it. I don't want to see him no more. I don't. I just don't. I want to see guys with enough talent to have a chance. In my mind, my cerebralness, that I can say he's got a chance because he's got enough talent, enough ability. And so if it's 168, I don't want to see these guys unless it's like Benavidez. And listen, Benavidez isn't the most developed guy in the world, but he's at least got talent in one area, power. One area, strength, physical. One area where I can say, okay, I'll go with it. Okay, I don't want to see no more unless I see maybe a Charlo. And Charlo's are not perfect, not close to it. But at least they get enough talent where if it's a catchweight fight and he drops down to make a catchweight fight to fight him, I'll look at it because at least they got some talent to where they can pull me in to say, okay, I'll peek, I'll believe, I'll take a look, I believe that there's a chance. Or I want to see him if he really wants to put his stamp on the greatest, where people get carried away with that because there was too many great Mexican fighters, too many. But if you want to get to that, even thinking about that, go fight Beterbiev, go fight Bivol. Yeah, and then really, you already went up to light heavyweight, so don't say you can't go up to light heavyweight because you did it already.
Canelo got to stop picking his own opponents, man. He needs to be in there with Cello, both of them. He needs to fight both of them.
Charlo.
He needs to fight both of them. Then fight that guy, Benavidez.
Are they saying
Benavidez. Fight both of them. Because you got to get ready for Benavidez. He's going to fight those two brothers, then he fight Benavidez.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Canelo Alvarez, he calls Mike Tyson, he calls Teddy Atlas, and everyone else that wants to see him fight the best, he calls them haters. He said he's fought the best already. I'll go ahead and quote him. He said, look, what I see and what I know is I beat the number one fighter at 168. It was Caleb Smith. Next, Billy Joe Saunders second. Next, third was Plant. So I beat all the best at 168. They were all undefeated. I beat all the best at 168. And now there's people saying you need to fight this one, like always. Let me start by correcting Canelo on the last thing he said, and then we're going to talk about everything else. But did you hear Canelo? He said, now they say you need to fight this one. What do you mean now? Charlo and Andrade has been calling you out for over 6 years now through 3 weight classes. Canelo is trying to make it sound like he already beat Andrade and Charlo at 160. Then he moved up, he beat David Benavidez, and now there's this new guy, David Morrell, that everyone wants him to fight. That's when someone would say something like, man, I've already beat the best. Now you guys say, I need to fight this guy. Or now you guys say, I'm ducking this guy. You talk this way when you are fighting the best, the most dangerous opponents and beating them. Do you guys see the artwork on the screen right now? I came up with this entire concept. I had somebody draw it for me, but I came up with the whole concept. This drawing was done almost 8 months to a year before Canelo decided to fight Caleb Plant, when no one knew who Canelo was going to fight next. Some people were saying, oh, he's going to fight Charlo now. He's going to fight Andre now, etc., right? You know how they say a picture says 100 words, right? Well, this picture right here says 1,000 words. If you look closely, you'll see the direction that Canelo Alvarez is running. He's running towards the end zone where Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant are to get away from David Benavidez, Charlo, and Andre, while the WBC lineman, Mauricio Suleiman, is there blocking for Canelo Alvarez. Something else you'll notice in this photo is Canelo Alvarez is running in the wrong direction, which is called a safety in the sport of football, right? You see, Canelo would rather actually lose points in the game than score points for his team, because Canelo understands if he runs in the wrong direction, there is no resistance. If he runs in the right direction, you see the resistance that exists there. It ain't too easy to score that 7 points or that 6 points if you got to get through those 3 guys, right? Once again, this artwork tells the whole story from the inception. 154, when Canelo was at 154, like it is today, it was one of the deepest divisions in the sport of boxing. Canelo Alvarez could have made history at 154. Can you imagine Canelo becoming undisputed in a division where both, not one, but the Charlo brothers, both of them were champions? Jamal Charlo had just got the biggest win in that division out of everyone there. Jamal Charlo had just knocked out the very dangerous, undefeated Julian J. Rock Williams, right? So you had the Charlo brothers, you had Andre, and you had Lara, the one guy that Canelo Alvarez did fight after 2 years of avoiding him, after Lara had to jump on the stage and call him out. Canelo finally fought him. But then Canelo, he ended up becoming the mandatory for Demetrius Andre's belt at 154. Who becomes the #1 contender, the mandatory, just to turn down a title shot? Well, actually, there's a couple of people who would do it. Canelo Alvarez, Jaime Munguia, Ryan Garcia, and even Jojo Diaz attempted to do it, but was unsuccessful at avoiding the title shot because the fight he wanted, Ryan Garcia actually pulled out.
Canelo, you a bitch. I'm putting it out there. No, I don't like to disrespect men that step into the ring, but then you fighting Kirtland that hasn't been in the ring since Glenn Tapia, when you have an opportunity to fight Demetrius Andre for the WBO. Damn, I thought in the sport of boxing, people want to be a champion, to have that title.
Hell, that's what we all thought, right? I mean, after all, Canelo Alvarez is always trying to justify his position today by telling people how many belts he's won. So how come he didn't want to win this belt when he was the mandatory and he didn't have a belt? Man, you can go out there and win 100 belts, but it really doesn't matter if you're not fighting against the best competition, if you're not in there with very dangerous opponents that have a chance of winning. You know, when I go to the gym and I get on the cardio machines, I watch YouTube, I watch fights, old good fights, right? One of the fights I watched a couple of times was Golovkin versus Canelo 1 and 2. And it was a very entertaining fight to watch. It was exciting and entertaining because it was a 50-50 competitive fight. You could not tell who was going to win that fight from round to round. It felt like that fight took place like 10 years ago when I was watching it. Because now when we watch Canelo Alvarez fight, we never see him in fights like that. And that's how you know that Canelo Alvarez is not fighting the best, when you know how the fights are going to play out. I'm telling you guys right now, if the Makabu fight takes place, Makabu will not go past the 3rd round. Guaranteed he won't go past the 3rd round. This will be one of Canelo Alvarez's easiest fights in his entire career. It might be the easiest. And that will prove that this was nothing but a big oversized cherry. Guys, everything I say is fact. You ask yourself right now, just go back and ask yourself, who has Canelo Alvarez's most difficult fights been against? You would say Mayweather, Lara, Triple G, even Austin Trout, right? And what do all 4 of those opponents have in common? Canelo Alvarez, he couldn't knock out any of them, right? So we know that when Canelo is in a tough fight, the fight, it goes rounds, it goes the distance. It usually doesn't even come close to ending in a knockout. So once again, if this fight is supposed to be this big tough step up for Canelo fighting against Macaboo, that's the fight you would expect to see, and we know that's not the fight we're going to see. We're going to see another James Kirkland situation. We're going to see another Rocky Fielding situation. It's funny how Canelo fans try to defend Canelo because they always talk about him as if he's a retired fighter. He's not even fighting anymore. When they start talking about things that he did 2-3 years ago. I take that back. Not 2 or 3 years ago, more like 7 or 8 years ago, right? Like when he fought Floyd Mayweather. That's what they'll bring up. Oh, he fought Mayweather. He fought Shane Mosley, which I never understand why they bring up Shane Mosley's name, because Shane wasn't even ranked. Matter of fact, did you know that Shane Mosley was coming off of a loss when he fought Canelo Alvarez? In fact, his last 3 fights before the Canelo Alvarez fight was 2 losses and 1 draw. The graphic on the screen right here, that's BoxRec. That's Shane Mosley's last 3 fights leading up to the Canelo Alvarez fight. He was fighting against Shane Mosley on a Floyd Mayweather undercard, and Oscar De La Hoya told him, this version of Shane Mosley, you have to knock him out. Canelo didn't knock him out. Then they say, oh, he fought Lara, a fight many people believe he lost, and he never gave Lara a rematch. Like Floyd Mayweather gave Castillo a rematch and Maidana a rematch, like Jamel Charlo is giving Castaño a rematch. Canelo never did that because he's not built like those fighters I just mentioned. Then it's on a Gennady Golovkin. He fought Golovkin twice and the fights ended in controversy. Many people believe he lost both fights. Guys, all of those fights you mentioned in the past, the risk that Canelo Alvarez took in the past is the exact reason why he does not want to take risks today. And that's why he could never be considered pound for pound the best fighter in the world. Because meanwhile, fighters like Terrence Crawford is still going after the best competition. I mean, how are you guys using this logic for Canelo? Oh, you know, because he fought so-and-so 3 years ago. And on top of that, it doesn't even matter if he lost to them or not. If that's the case, how come none of you guys were saying this after Floyd Mayweather beat Diego Corrales, Castillo, Ricky Hatton, and the list just goes on and on? Hell, before he even beat De La Hoya. If we're going off of your logic, you guys should have been calling this man pound for pound no matter what he did when he was in his late 30s, when he was in his mid 30s, because he had already put in way more impressive work when he was in his 20s compared to Canelo Alvarez's entire career. And when I say more impressive work, we're not just talking about having a name on your resume. We're talking about beating that name without controversy. And if the fight was too close, you run it back. Do you guys think it is a coincidence that the only loss, at least the only official loss on Canelo Alvarez's resume today is against Floyd Mayweather, a black, athletic, slick, intelligent boxer, and not to mention undefeated? Once again, do you guys think it is a coincidence that since Canelo Alvarez lost to that black, undefeated, slick boxer, he has not faced an undefeated black slick boxer since? The narrative has always been, oh, Canelo Alvarez, he's gotten so much better since the loss to Floyd Mayweather. He's learned so much. The only thing Canelo Alvarez learned about that Floyd Mayweather fight is to never fight an undefeated black fighter in his prime again. And the sad thing is, Floyd wasn't even in his prime. Floyd was an old ass man and way smaller. He was 15 pounds smaller than Canelo Alvarez. Could you guys imagine if the roles were reversed? And Floyd Mayweather was the one that was the natural 154 pounder that was 23 years old. And it was Canelo that was closer to 40 than 30. And he had moved up 5 weight classes and he was going to be 15 pounds smaller than Floyd Mayweather. How would that fight have turned out, guys? Floyd Mayweather would have most likely stopped Canelo Alvarez in a fight like that. With that type of physical advantage over Canelo, 15 pounds bigger, naturally at a higher weight class, the fight probably would have never even taken place because old media would have been begging Canelo Alvarez not to take it. They would be pushing him in a complete different direction, and even if Floyd wanted the fight under those circumstances, they would be accusing him of cherry picking. Why are you trying to fight the old Canelo Alvarez, right? This is what they would say. So we know what time it is at the end of the day. With that being said, let me go ahead and quote something else Canelo Alvarez said, because I want to get into what he said about David Benavidez when it comes to Mexicans fighting against Mexican fighters, or Mexicans just fighting the best, period. Okay, so Canelo, he continues where he left off, talking about the backlash he's receiving for not fighting against the lineal champion at 168, David Benavidez, or even Jamal Charlo. This is what he said. He said, "This always happens, but I beat the best champions at 168. Then they say he's scared of him, or he's scared of that guy. I'm not scared about anything. I don't avoid anybody. But what does that guy Benavidez bring to me? Nothing. Nothing. Mention a champion they fought before." And he's kind of talking about Benavidez or even Charlo. "How many? I really don't care. Haters are always going to be haters." End quote. First of all, guys, David Benavidez is Canelo's mandatory, just like Avni Yildirim was Canelo's mandatory. So who did Yildirim beat? How many champions did he beat? How many champions did Caleb Plant beat? How many champions did Billy Joe Saunders beat? By the way, Jamal Charlo, just for argument's sake, Jamal Charlo, like I told you, back at 154, he had the biggest win in the division when he knocked out Julian J. Rock Williams. And he was calling out Canelo. This is a time when Canelo did not have a belt. If you care so much about who people were fighting, that was your perfect opportunity to fight Jamal Charlo. If you cared about that so much, right? He asked, what does David Benavidez bring to the table? Oh, you mean besides being the only undefeated fighter in the division that has power that can match yours? Power, speed, and youth? And is overall the most dangerous fighter in the division? Something else I want you guys to pay attention to. Do you guys remember around the same time that he called Demetrius Andrade a horrible fighter, when he was asked about fighting David Benavidez, he said he wasn't going to fight him because he's from the same country, because he's Mexican. He said he's no longer fighting Mexican fighters. Now he's saying he's not going to fight him because he hasn't done anything, like a Yildirim. See, the problem is Canelo is falling into the same trap that a lot of fighters fall into. They start listening to their fans on the internet and they start repeating those talking points. And what they don't understand is, see, people on the internet, they can easily remain anonymous. They can make up stuff, they can troll, they can contradict themselves all day because there is no name and face attached to that profile, right? But when Canelo repeats those same talking points, he has a long history of things he has said on a microphone, on camera. This is why I always tell you, what? The most dangerous weapon in the world is a microphone and a camera. So there's a track record for every single thing that Canelo Alvarez says. So once again, a fan can say, oh, well, who has he fought? But when Canelo says that, then we could be like, but you fought Yildirim. So how did Yildirim get a shot? How did Caleb Plant get a shot? Jamal Charlo has become a champion in 2 different weight classes. So has Demetrius Andrade. They've been calling you out for 6 years. So if Canelo is going with the who have they fought line, the same question can be asked when it comes to at least 80% of Canelo Alvarez's opponents. So Canelo, once again, he says the people that want to see him fight David Benavidez, Charlo, Andrade, they are all just a bunch of haters. Now let me correct you on this, Canelo Alvarez. You know what a hater is? A hater, or I should say the example of haters, is when you have a whole bunch of people that want you to fight someone in particular. You say, okay, you oblige them, you fight that person, you beat them, and then those people still complain. That is what you call a hater. Floyd Mayweather is a perfect example. Did you guys know 6 months before the Manny Pacquiao fight was announced, people were still accusing Floyd Mayweather of ducking Manny Pacquiao. And I already have the video on the internet. You guys can just search Freddie Roach Admits on YouTube and you will see it. It's an interview I did with Freddie Roach. Freddie has already admitted in the very, very first negotiations, it was their fault that the fight never took place in the first place. Because, of course, Manny Pacquiao did not want to take Olympic-style random drug testing, so he turned down the fight, and he turned down a 50-50 split when Floyd Mayweather was the A side. Think about that. So when Floyd did what the fans wanted him to do, and he fought Manny Pacquiao, also Manny Pacquiao was considered pound for pound number 2 on the list when they fought. So you can't even try to use the age excuse. I mean, even the Keith Thurman win that Manny Pacquiao, got shuts down an age excuse. But more importantly, the fact that he was ranked number 2, the best in the world, that shuts all of those excuses down. So you have pound for pound number 1 going up against pound for pound number 2 in the world. That is equivalent to Terrence Crawford fighting against Lomachenko. I'm talking about before he lost to Teofimo Lopez, right? When people were arguing who's number 1, who's number 2. That's equivalent to them fighting against each other in the same weight class. Let's just say hypothetically, they were naturally in the same weight division. Like I said, it's when a fighter takes those dangerous fights that the fans want to see you in, and then fans still complain after you beat that guy. That is the true definition of hating on someone. When Andre Ward was calling out Gennady Golovkin, because Golovkin was calling out fighters at 168 like Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and Carl Froch, the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world was also in this same weight class, Andre Ward. He started calling out Golovkin. Golovkin started to avoid the fight. Old media started protecting Gennady Golovkin. In fact, HBO, they took protecting to a whole nother level. They reached out to Andre Ward, offered him a 3-fight deal to move up in weight and fight Sergey Kovalev, who was considered pound for pound one of the best fighters in the world. Some organizations had him at number 1, the best in the world, right? And this is what all the fans kept saying. The funny thing about Andre Ward is every time he called out some undefeated prospect or someone who had a buzz that, of course, was on a hope list, wasn't black, for example, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. There was a time when Jr. had a serious buzz. Soon as Andre Ward started calling him out, the fans immediately tried to protect Chavez, and they were saying, why don't you fight Golovkin? Leave him alone and fight Golovkin. And apparently they didn't think Andre Ward would do that. So when Andre Ward started aggressively calling out Golovkin, then those same fans, they said, why don't you move up to 175? Why don't you fight Kovalev? Andre Ward still obliges them, beats Kovalev twice, right? Regardless if you want to say who won the first fight or not, the bottom line is the 2 fights concluded with Andre Ward stopping him. To this day, none of those fans that asked Andre Ward to move up to 175, none of those fans even congratulated or even gave credit to Andre Ward for even moving up in weight to take this dangerous fight. They just went completely silent or made excuses for why Andre Ward won. That is the real definition of hate. And we're talking about race hate. Even Terrence Crawford comes to mind when it comes to quote unquote hating. Everyone tries to use convenient memory right now and act like they completely forgot that Terrence Crawford was being accused of avoiding multiple fighters when he fought at 140. When Mauricio Herrera had a huge buzz and he had just got that, controversial, you could kind of say it was a win over Danny Garcia. He didn't get the decision, but people felt he won. After the Danny Garcia fight, Mauricio Herrera, he had a serious buzz. Terrence Crawford calls him out. Fans start trying to protect Herrera from Crawford. Then they start to say to him, why don't you fight against Postal? You're ducking Victor Postal. Remember, this is at the time when Victor Postal had just knocked out Lucas Matisse. Pulled off the upset. It was a huge win. They start saying Crawford was ducking Victor Postal. Of course, Crawford takes the Victor Postal fight. None of those fans ever congratulated Terrence Crawford. Once again, this is what you call hating. Same thing happened with the Felix Diaz fight. Hell, same thing happened in the Porter fight, the Crawford versus Porter fight. Fans were accusing Crawford of ducking Porter, even though Crawford originally, he wanted the guy that had already beat Porter, which is how the playoffs usually works, right? When you win, you advance. The two teams, they advance and they play against each other. You don't advance and then play against the team that just lost in the playoffs, right? So even though that makes all the logical sense in the world, these fans were still accusing Crawford of ducking Porter. And then once Crawford stops Porter, now those same fans are trying to discredit the win. So that long segment right there is the true actual definition of hating. Canelo's definition of hating is really just snitching, telling the truth, not being loyal to him. It's funny because speaking of being loyal, if you guys have been following all my videos about this whole situation, you may recall, I told you guys long time ago, you guys remember when Canelo was still with Golden Boy, he was still signed with DAZN. You remember, out of nowhere, Canelo told the public that Oscar De La Hoya was not loyal. He talked about how Oscar De La Hoya always changed his trainers and he's just not a loyal person. He said a little bit more than that, but that's the gist of what he said. And I told you guys, for Canelo to just come out of nowhere and say this, clearly they had a conversation. And I truly believe the conversation was Oscar De La Hoya putting pressure on Canelo to take the Charlo fight, to take the Andre fight. And because Canelo didn't want to do it, Canelo started to fear that Oscar De La Hoya was going to air him out and tell people that he never wanted the Charlo fight. He didn't want the Andre fight. We're trying to make these fights, but my fighter, Canelo, he doesn't want to fight them. This is what Canelo feared once Oscar De La Hoya started telling him, we need to make these fights. Remember, Oscar De La Hoya is the one who said when he was promoting Canelo, he said, in order for Canelo Alvarez to be great, he has to fight the likes of Andre and Charlo. He said this. And more recently, as I suspected back then, Oscar De La Hoya, he came out and he revealed that Canelo Alvarez did not and does not want to fight Jermall Charlo. This is what Oscar De La Hoya said. Now, it's not up for debate. It is a fact that Canelo did not want to fight Jermall Charlo when he was at 160. Why? Because Canelo vacated his belt by the WBC's president's own admission. Canelo, he elected to vacate his belt so he can walk around with this fake made-up Walmart belt, the franchise belt. So for you fans to say, what are you talking about? Charlo's own brother said that Charlo turned down the fight. Listen, man, I don't care if Jesus said that Charlo turned down a fight. You still have to explain to everyone, if that is the case, how does the mandatory turn down the title shot and then end up with the champion's belt? Explain that to me. Because if that is the case, then right now, with Devin Haney being the lightweight champion and Ryan Garcia turning down a title shot, then that means right now, Ryan Garcia, he should be the champion, according to that logic, right? That means Jaime Munguia, he should have both Andre and Charlo's belt because he's the mandatory for their belts, but he doesn't want to fight them. Nothing trumps the facts, guys. There's nothing that trumps the whole truth. You don't vacate your belt because the mandatory doesn't want to fight you. You vacate your belt because you're avoiding the mandatory. So everything Oscar De La Hoya said about Canelo Alvarez avoiding Charlo, it's come to fruition. It's been proven. Now, this doesn't guarantee Canelo, or this doesn't say that Canelo will never fight Charlo, because once again, Charlo looked horrible in his last performance. I would have thought that would have been a great quote-unquote business move. How these fans love to say it's business, etc., etc. It would have seemed to me like that would have been the best business move for Canelo. You're fighting this man coming off of his worst performance, but he's still undefeated. It's going to be the biggest payday Canelo has ever made. That's hands down. It's going to be the biggest payday. Charlo is from Texas. Canelo Alvarez has a huge Mexican fan base in Texas. it would do ridiculous pay-per-view buys. There is no downside to this fight other than the wrong guy winning. So Canelo Alvarez's definition of hating is being disloyal to him. He felt that Oscar De La Hoya was being disloyal, and now he feels that the fans, at least real boxing fans that want to see the best fight the best, are being disloyal because they're snitching on him. And I don't want to hear none of you Canelo fans say, hey man, he didn't say directly to Mike Tyson, you're a hater. No, he just said anyone that wants to see me fight David Benavidez or Charlo are a bunch of haters. He said haters are going to hate. There is no difference. You don't have to say Mike Tyson's name directly. You put him in that group. It's just like when I talk about these racist boxing fans in the sport of boxing, and then all of a sudden, some guy pops up in the comment section and he says, hey man, I'm just letting you know I'm not a racist. I have black friends. My favorite fighter is Mike Tyson, and I even went to the Drake concert. I get comments like this, guys. I talked about racism in boxing, and even though I didn't know this person's name and who he was, he automatically started to defend himself, right? Even though I wasn't talking to him directly. But what Canelo Alvarez did, he made it far more clear he was talking about Mike Tyson, Teddy Atlas, me, myself, and every other fan that wants to watch the best fight the best. Teofimo, he pretty much said the same thing before he lost to Kambosos. He said, oh, you guys are a bunch of D-riders. He said that to a reporter one day. He said, you guys on Devin Haney's payroll because people want to see him fight Devin Haney. The funny thing is, all the reporter asked Teo, the reporter didn't even say anything about Devin Haney. He told Teo what Josh Taylor said. Josh Taylor has said that Teo had unfinished business at 135. He still needs to unify all of the belts. And this is what Teo said in response. He said, oh man, see, you guys on Devin's payroll, you're just a fan of his. I want you guys to just think about how that sounds for a second. Teofimo doesn't even realize he's basically saying, if you want to see me fight Devin Haney, it must be because you know that Devin has a very good chance of beating me. Because if that was a fight that Teo knew that he would never lose, you would never assume that someone who wants to see you fight Devin Haney is a hater or was a hater. So if Canelo believes someone wanting him to fight the most dangerous fighter in the super middleweight division, the only fighter that once again has the type of power that matches Canelo's power, has a very good chance of winning the fight. If you want to see a fight like that, you are hating on Canelo Alvarez. Guys, what does that say about Canelo's confidence if he feels this way? What does it say about Teofimo's confidence if he felt that way? Let's be honest for a second. Would you ever hear someone saying, oh man, you must be hating on Terrence Crawford if you want to see him fight against Errol Spence? Would you ever hear Terrence Crawford say, hey man, why y'all hating on me, telling me that y'all want to see me fight against Errol Spence? Of Mexican fans were accusing Floyd Mayweather of ducking Canelo Alvarez. Did you guys ever hear Floyd Mayweather say, stop hating on me, man. Haters gonna hate. Y'all want to see me fight Canelo. What has he done? You know, the funny thing about that whole what has he done situation is Canelo, he had been calling out Floyd Mayweather for a really, really long time. But this was before he fought Austin Trout. So Canelo really hadn't done anything to really promote the fight and make it a really big event. So what did Floyd Mayweather do? Floyd Mayweather told Canelo and his team, you guys have to fight someone so that we can really promote this fight. My point is, Floyd Mayweather could have easily pulled a Canelo and ended up not fighting Canelo at all, saying, what has he done? What has he done? What has he done? So if Canelo truly feels that David Benavidez hasn't done anything, then he should do the same thing that Floyd Mayweather did. After all, you Canelo fans always say that Canelo is just doing all of the same things, right? Okay, well, why don't you guys show me? Show me Canelo doing the same thing. Like I said, in this situation, Canelo should be reaching out to David Benavidez, looking at the potential when it comes to how successful that fight would be. Reach out to Benavidez's team and tell them, look, we need you to fight some type of name, and you beat that name, and then we could go ahead and set up this fight. It would be much bigger. Canelo's not even doing that because Canelo has zero interest in getting in the ring with some young lion that can match his power and would definitely hands down be one of Canelo Alvarez's toughest fights. Like I told you guys before, it's not a coincidence. Every single time Canelo was matched tough, the fight, it went the distance. And half the time, most people don't even feel Canelo won the fight. Once again, if you guys say that Canelo is just trying to do the same things or is doing the same things that Floyd Mayweather did, well, guess what? Mayweather always fought the hardest punchers, all the way from 130 pounds to 154 pounds. He's never avoided big punchers. In fact, Floyd was chasing the big punchers. Diego Corrales, one of Floyd Mayweather's best wins, if you really think about it, Diego Corrales is Canelo's version of David Benavidez. The only difference is David Benavidez, he has a jab. Corrales, he never had a jab. He was tall, just like Benavidez, and extremely strong and durable. But he preferred to fight on the inside. He always went for the knockout. Another power puncher that Floyd Mayweather chased. And this guy was avoiding Floyd Mayweather, just like everyone's avoiding Devin Haney and Demetrius Andrade. It was the undefeated Brazilian bomber, Acelino Popo Freitas. Floyd Mayweather was on his bumper, and Freitas wanted no smoke. Now, I'm talking about the opponents that he was chasing when he was Pretty Boy back in the lighter weight classes. But then you have the big punches that Floyd Mayweather fought towards the end of his career. Maidana, who was 20 pounds heavier than Floyd Mayweather. Canelo Alvarez was 15s heavier, and Oscar De La Hoya was 20 pounds heavier when he fought Floyd Mayweather. The only time we see Canelo Alvarez fight someone that's bigger than him is when it's against the weakest competition available. Canelo Alvarez fighting Usyk at cruiserweight is equivalent to Floyd Mayweather fighting Canelo Alvarez at 152 pounds. Floyd Mayweather never moved up in weight to fight a Makabu or a Rocky Fielding, and that is a fact. He never even moved up in weight to fight a Sergey Kovalev. I'm talking about that version of Sergey Kovalev. At the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez, he watched all of his Mexican heroes fight against the best, which often included black fighters. And as a kid, he watched this. He watched them often lose to black fighters from America. And this is the reason why Canelo decided not to fight another undefeated black fighter since the loss to Floyd Mayweather. I'm going to keep saying this. You cannot get on the track and race against the slowest guys and then call yourself the fastest man in the world. It does not work that way. For now, Canelo Alvarez, he's making a joke of his career. We'll see if he ever starts to take his career serious by getting in the ring with tough competition, taking on opponents that the fans really want to see him fight. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. Fellas, I've got some great news for you. If you've lost your hair or have a receding hairline, the time has come when you can finally get your hairline back through a process called scalp micropigmentation. So here's how it works. It's a hair tattoo that replicates the look of your hair follicles when you have fully shaved it down. So to get this hookup, make sure you follow and contact my man Scalp Carolinas on Instagram. Contact them at 704-499-3471. And make sure you follow them on Instagram. All right, now check this out, guys. If you're looking to repair eczema scars, burns and bruises, dark spots and blemishes, then this right here is the perfect product for you guys. It's called Elo Diki Face and Body Oil. Athletes and top-ranking boxers, they're also using it after training to reduce swelling, inflammation, and to ease the pain. So get yours today. Go to elodiki.com, like them on Facebook, and follow them on Instagram.